Here is something that most financial advice gets completely wrong. It assumes that the hardest part of building wealth is knowing what to do with your money. So it gives you investment strategies and budgeting frameworks and percentage rules about how much to save. And those things can be useful, but they all skip over the actual hardest part, which has nothing to do with money at all. The hardest part of building wealth is changing how you see yourself. My name is Jimmy, and I spend way too much time thinking about money, investing, and the psychology behind how people use it. If you're someone who wants to understand money a little better, consider subscribing and giving this video a thumbs up. Let me take you back to Sarah and Marcus, 5 years into their careers at the same marketing firm. Both still earning similar salaries. Both intelligent, hardworking people making what looked like reasonable financial decisions from the outside. But by year 5, a gap had already opened up between them that most people wouldn't have predicted at the start. Sarah had accumulated about $40,000 in her investment account. Marcus had a decent emergency fund and was contributing enough to his 401k to get the company match, but his net worth outside of that was close to zero. And here is where things get interesting, because the real difference between them at year 5 wasn't the $40,000. The real difference was in the identity each of them had built around money. Sarah had developed what I call wealth consciousness. When she considered any purchase, she didn't just run a quick mental calculation about whether she could afford it. She asked whether the purchase moved her closer to or further from the person she was trying to become financially. She had built an identity as someone who builds wealth, and every financial decision she made either reinforced or threatened that identity. This sounds subtle, but it creates a completely different decision-making process at every level. But this creates a bigger problem for most people that goes completely unexamined. Most people's financial identity is built entirely around their income level. They see themselves as someone who earns a certain amount and therefore lives a certain way. When that identity gets threatened by the idea of saving more or spending less, the brain resists it, not because the math doesn't make sense, but because it feels like a threat to who you are. Marcus, despite being thoughtful and hardworking, was operating inside exactly that identity. He spent money reactively, responding to emotions, impulses, and the quiet social pressure of being surrounded by people who were spending their entire incomes just like he was. He bought things to reward himself for working hard. He upgraded his lifestyle because it felt like the natural thing to do as his income grew. He wasn't spending recklessly. He was spending in a way that felt completely consistent with who he believed himself to be. And almost nobody talks about this part. Financial problems are almost never really financial problems at their core. They are identity problems. They are a mismatch between who you see yourself as and the financial behaviors that would actually serve you. Until that identity shifts, no budgeting app or investment strategy will create lasting change. Here's where things get really interesting. After year 10, something began happening for Sarah that was invisible from the outside but was transforming her relationship with money from the inside. Her investment account had grown to over $200,000, but more important than the number was what the number was doing. Her investments were now generating their own income through dividends and compound growth. Her money was actively making more money while she was at work, while she was asleep, while she was on vacation. This is the threshold that most people never reach because they exit the process too early, or never started at all. When your money starts working harder than you do, something shifts psychologically in a way that is very difficult to describe until you experience it. Wealth stops feeling like a destination you are struggling toward and starts feeling like a process you are already inside. The motivation changes completely. In the beginning, Sarah saved because she wanted security. She wanted a buffer between herself and financial disaster. She wanted to know that a job loss or a medical emergency wouldn't unravel everything she had built. That is a powerful motivator, but it is essentially fear-based. You are running away from something. But by year 10, she was saving and investing for a completely different reason. She was building freedom. And those two motivations, security and freedom, feel entirely different when you are living inside them. Security is about protecting what you have. Freedom is about expanding what is possible. Now look, Marcus wasn't oblivious to all of this. He understood conceptually that saving and investing mattered. He had seen the compound interest charts. He knew the conventional wisdom, but understanding something intellectually and actually changing your behavior around it are two completely different things. And the gap between those two things is where most people's financial potential quietly disappears. Here's what most people don't realize about behavior change. You cannot sustain financial behaviors that conflict with your identity. If you see yourself as someone who has earned a certain lifestyle, saving aggressively will feel like punishment every single month. It will feel like you are depriving yourself of something you deserve. And eventually, most people stop punishing themselves and return to the lifestyle that matches how they see themselves. This is why willpower-based approaches to saving money almost always fail over the long term. You cannot white-knuckle your way to wealth. The behaviors have to feel consistent with who you are, not like a sacrifice you are making despite who you are. Sarah's approach worked not because she had more discipline than Marcus, but because she had built an identity where saving and investing were simply what she did. They were not sacrifices. They were expressions of who she was. When she paid herself first every month, it felt right, consistent, aligned with her self-image. When Marcus tried to save more, it felt like deprivation, like he was taking something away from himself. But something strange starts to happen when your wealth consciousness deepens over time. The things you thought you needed start to feel less important. Not because you are forcing yourself to care less about them, but because you have found a different and more durable source of satisfaction. Sarah discovered that watching her net worth grow gave her a genuine hit of satisfaction that no purchase could replicate, because it was building towards something, not just consuming something. Marcus, on the other hand, was trapped in what researchers call the consumption cycle. The more he earned, the more he spent. The more he spent, the more he needed to maintain the lifestyle he had created. His emotional relationship with money was actually deteriorating as his income grew, because his financial anxiety was keeping pace with his expenses. He had more money flowing through his life than ever and less sense of security than he had expected. Now you might be thinking, this all sounds reasonable. But what about actually enjoying your life while you are building wealth? What about experiences, travel, the things that make life feel worth living? This is the most common and most legitimate objection to everything we have talked about. Here is the honest answer. Sarah was not living a diminished life. She was living a deliberate one. She spent money on experiences and things that genuinely mattered to her. And she was ruthless about not spending money on things that did not. She took trips, she went to dinners, she bought things she loved, but every spending decision was conscious. It had passed through a filter. Does this actually add to my life? Or does it just feel like it should because I can afford it? That filter is the practical tool that wealth consciousness gives you. Not guilt about spending, not constant sacrifice, but genuine clarity about what your money is actually buying you in terms of real satisfaction versus the temporary feeling of spending. By year 20, Sarah's net worth had crossed $2 million. She had options that most people her age could not imagine. She could leave a job she stopped enjoying. She could take a year off to do something meaningful. She could help her parents when they needed support without it creating a financial crisis for her. She had built not just wealth, but freedom, and that freedom was the real return on 20 years of deliberate financial decisions. Marcus, now in his late 40s, was starting to understand what had happened. Not with bitterness, but with clarity. He had spent 20 years trading his income for a lifestyle, and the lifestyle had felt good in the moment, but had left him with nothing that compounded, nothing that grew, nothing that worked while he wasn't working. The wealth mindset is not a personality type. It is not something you either have or you don't. It is a set of beliefs about what money is for, beliefs that can be examined and changed at any point in your life. The math gets harder if you start later, but the principle remains exactly the same at every age and every income level. Pay yourself first. Measure success by net worth, not by lifestyle. Find your identity in what you are building, not just in what you are earning, and give your money time and space to work. Those 4 things applied consistently over years are the entire formula. Everything else is detail. The gap between financial stress and financial freedom is not as wide as it looks from the outside, but crossing it requires more than a budget. It requires deciding clearly and deliberately who you are going to be with money. Sarah made that decision at 28. It is a decision available to anyone at any age, starting with the very next paycheck.